Good morning, everyone. This is Carl Dakin, and this is the Successful Funding Show. On this LinkedIn live streaming presentation, it is my goal to try to share with you, the audience, more information about funding, anything that may advance funding or impair funding. And today, my guest is Dave Snell. Dave has his own security company, and we're going to talk about a variety of things because security of your information is important for all kinds of reasons, not only for your own personal goals, but also you may have a responsibility to protect the information you're holding on behalf of somebody else. So we have so many different things we can talk about. This may be the first in a series because I don't think I'm going to get all my questions answered today. But let's get going and what's Dave's information. And Dave, if you would just start off, tell me how in the world you got to a point where you know all this stuff about security and why you chose this as a profession, and then we'll get into a bunch of questions about it.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. It's a real pleasure to be on here and talk about this important subject and something that I'm passionate about that I've been doing for quite a while. And you asked about my history and what got me into this is really being in the Navy. I've got into the security clearance world very quickly and early in my career, where we have to protect national security secrets, whether it's tactics, it's intelligence sources and methods, and even on a ship, we had to protect capabilities of our ship and our movements. And then I moved into the Navy cryptology world where we're talking about signals intelligence, listening to email, listening to phone calls, listening to radio calls, reading emails and other messages that are going over the airwaves. So some of the most sensitive things that we're talking about in the world and how we protect our nation. So it just lent itself that as I was doing this security, this intelligence work in the Navy, we start protecting information, and cyber is a means of transmitting, storing, and producing information. So it really comes down to what information are we trying to protect. There's an age-old argument in the community of, is it InfoSec, information security, or cyber security? I won't get into the details just now, but that kind of drove me into this path. And when I retired from the Navy, coming up on 9 years ago, cyber was still, it hasn't declined really, but it was the big thing. And I had a lot of skill in it. I enjoyed hacking. I was a wireless hacker for a while. I got into web penetration testing. And how do I help companies protect that information? And then about 2 years ago, just under 2 years ago, I decided, tired of working for others, so let me do this for myself in my own format and my own process for helping small to medium-sized businesses, a little bit larger businesses in the medium category even. How do I help them protect their information? And it can cross a broad spectrum of types and regulations that we can talk about as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, this show is about raising funding, and typically during an offering to raise funding, you're required to put a statement of risk, things that can impair, interfere with your ability to successfully realize the goals of the company. And one of them that now is kind of a standard provision is I might get my data hacked, and somebody gets into my computer and they can go different directions. They may just see your information and take it and resell it. They may decide that they want to destroy all the data on your system where you may not have a backup, where you can go get the information and get it back up to speed. Or they may hold you ransom and basically put a gun to your head and say, unless you pay me money, you're never going to get your data back.
And then
So,
still not give you your data back. It's up to
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah, they keep the money. So the thing is that this presents a risk to a company that can vary greatly from a modest, just a nuisance. It's going to take us a while to get everything back in line, or it can shut down the company for a while, or it could even expose it to liability, to lawsuits for breach of privacy or failure to follow some government regulation, which seems to be backing up all the time. So, just kind of what are the basics? What should a small business be thinking to start building security, a level of protection around themselves, and making sure that their data is as protected as is reasonable?
Yeah, so I like to, when I work with when I work with companies, I like to go through a really what amounts to about a 5-step process. Is first we need to identify what information is critical to the functioning of that business. What is the information that distinguishes them in the marketplace? Whether that's intellectual property, whether that's some PII information, well, intellectual property from the business standpoint, but there's also PII, or maybe it's a healthcare industry where they need to understand PHI, personal health information versus personally identifiable information. Maybe they're a government contractor. They need to worry about what we call controlled unclassified information. It's not classified, but it's sensitive enough that the government has categorized it as important to protect. So there's a variety of information we need to focus on, and then say, okay, that's step one. What is my critical information point? Okay, well, what marketplace am I working in? What regulations do I have to concern myself with? If it's PII, PHI, I need to worry about HIPAA maybe. The Healthcare Access Act that controls how we protect that. If it's PII in general, it could be just a NIST or an ISO, what we call National Institute of Security and Technology, I think it stands for. But then if we talk about government contracting, we're talking about CMMC. It's a new program that's coming on with an increased vigor recently. It's just been formalized again. And then, okay, well, here's the things that we need to do. And they have their own litany of lists of things that you have to do to meet their expectations. But at the same time, I need to be looking at what are my threats. Am I looking at, as we joked about before the show, is it my neighbor down the street? Is it a competitor? Is it an insider? Do I have multiple employees and I'm worried about a disgruntled employee releasing my information or holding it ransom? Is it a nation state actor? We've got all these different categories, and we really need to do a thorough risk assessment of where do I really think my threat is coming from. And then I need to look at prioritizing my response. How am I going to put my resources appropriately to the critical risks and combating them? And small and medium-sized businesses don't have a huge budget, so I have to start really looking at what are my risks, where's the criticality of protecting that information, and finding somewhere in the middle. And then finally, we look at continuous monitoring. A lot of companies, unfortunately, say, oh, well, I did that list and I met the NIST requirements or the CMMC requirements. I'm done. Or I got my funding. I'm done. What do I care? Having that continuous monitoring program is really critical to maintaining security, because you're only as good as the last day that you secured your system, because the next day a new threat could evolve. You could have a new vulnerability come in. They're what we call 0 days. There are things that we don't understand yet that are vulnerabilities in our systems because nobody's exploited them. But if I know a 0 day and I've cracked it and I haven't used it yet, as a hacker, that's my bonus. On the other side, I need to be, I only have to be right. Well, the hacker has to be right one time. He's just going to find his way in. The defender has to be right all the time. There's no way to, protect everything. So you got to start prioritizing where you're going.
Okay, well, I've got about 2 million questions. We'll try to get to a few of them
Yeah.
today. But before we go forward, I want to say welcome to Don Cohen. Um, there it goes. Don is in our audience this morning. He is our, we call it our guru, a
Mentor.
mentor
Yeah.
who is helping us understand how to use this LinkedIn Live show, do newsletters, do other things to improve our brand and build our communities so that we can be more successful with greater efficiency in everything that we do. So Don says, hi, Carl, Dave, my favorite LinkedIn colleagues. I find that a questionable statement from Don since he works with Harvey Tuck and Kelly Steinke,
Yeah.
but I'll take it for now for what
Yes.
it is. Great topic today. Yeah, I'm so happy to have you on the show today, Dave, because as I said, this is in my mind like a pervasive threat. I see it; it's constant. And as you pointed out, there's peaks and lows. But when I'm raising funding, I'm still, I'll call it surprised a little bit
Yeah.
that when you ask the business, what are you doing to protect yourself against hacking? I get kind of a no response. It's kind of like, well, we have passwords or something,
Yeah.
and you're like, well, I don't know that that's good enough. Um, and so the from if I'm an investor and I'm looking at an offering memorandum, and I happen to be just a little bit uh, overly concerned or maybe appropriately concerned about hacking, it would be a question I would like to see that's even put in the offering memorandum. We have the following safeguards against this, or and even before we get into hacking, just preservation and protection of data. I've been involved with enough situations where somebody either got hacked or a flood occurred, a natural disaster, and not only their primary data, but also their primary data, because it had no secondary data, was all destroyed or it was messed up in a way where they couldn't get to it for too long. And it's always been an issue. And if a company doesn't understand that, and as an example, I'm working with two crowdfunding campaigns here in Colorado, where the crowdfunding platform crashed and it was down for 2 weeks in the middle of a capital campaign.
Yeah.
And they had been working on setting up mirror imaging and things to capture all the data and put it in another place where they could immediately flip over and restart with no loss of data. But in this case, they didn't have it in place yet. And if you're in the middle of a capital campaign and you've got an investor on the edge of writing that check, you don't want anything to interfere or distract that person because they may change their mind, may not come back to the table. So these are all things that have to be looked at. And in my business, I'm not that dependent upon what I do on my website, and yet I will have documents that I'm holding, which are at least temporarily top, trade secrets or confidential that I'm supposed to protect and not let anybody know about them. So I have my obligations to myself, but also to my clients as I work with them. And so the hard question that I asked a security expert one time was, is there anything you can do to your system that will be an absolute guarantee against it being hacked? And Dave, you're shaking your head. So in the legal world, it would require a oral affirmation or something.
If you're asking, I thought you were going to give his
No, I'm
response.
sorry.
Yes, no, no.
I'm done talking.
You're absolutely right. There is no 100% secure way, in my opinion, in my experience, because what you just alluded to a little bit is, and I mentioned earlier, is it's information. So cyber alludes to the technical means of how do we protect that information. But you and I are living proof of the third piece of this puzzle. There's the information, which is kind of ethereal. It's in our heads. It's on paper. There's a technical wire and electrons going around or stored, but it's in here. It's humans. There's no way to 100% protect that information from a thief, whether it's an insider threat, because again, that disgruntled employee or somebody's just loose lips. The old loose lips sink ships. People just get excited about their work and they, I shouldn't have said that. Sorry. There's no way to 100% guarantee that I've protected everything.
Right. And so understanding that perfection's not possible, you talked about this a little bit earlier, that you have to look at the threats and then you have to consider what is reasonable as far as safeguards that you can afford,
Right.
that do your best to protect against it. So it's interesting. I commonly put in offering memorandums under the risk statements that there is a risk of being hacked. This risk cannot be guaranteed. Okay. And we are going to implement reasonable efforts to protect against hacking, but there's no assurance that that's going to occur. And if we do get hacked, then it may impact the business seriously, which is what the risk statement's all about. They're trying to figure out what's going to slow you down, what's going to stop you, or actually eat up money doing something that does you no good. Um, so this process, I assume, is like me raising money. It's got to be customized, personalized to the business, because every business is different. Every business has a different budget. Every business is going to be, may go through actually different levels of risk. Because if you, as you described, if I just fired somebody,
Yeah.
I assume right there I have an elevated risk for a while.
Yeah. And it takes, risk is the key word. Is what is my risk? What is my threat to risk ratio, if you will, kind of, you know, am I concerned about that guy that I just let go? Do I know? And that's a leadership personal interaction issue more so than a technical issue. Again, that human interaction that really drives, okay, when I let him go or her go, do a quick risk assessment. Did I cut them off from their ability to gain or print information after? A lot of companies will not have a program in place for letting somebody go, and again, the leadership doesn't understand the person's life or their mental state. And a mental state, I mean, are they angry? Are they okay with being let go because they understand? And they'll have a meeting in HR. Hey, Carl, I've got to let you go. I'm sorry, we just don't have enough work for you. We don't have enough money. You're a dirt bag, whatever it is. And then they let the guy go back to his desk. And what does he do? He goes in and he puts in ransomware, or he prints out IP and says, ha, I'm taking the magic dust and I'm going to go sell it to your competitor. So people have to have processes in place ahead of these situations and ready for your investors, for your government auditors, maybe. Again, I come from a military government contractor background, so I'm very worried about CMMC for companies. But I've worked in the healthcare industry, clients, and they have issues. So, it's really an issue. Insider threat is a topic I've written about on my site, our newsletter idea that Don introduced us to. I just recently did one on insider threat. It's gaining more traction because we see more of it publicly. In our world, in my world rather, I called it espionage because we were talking about nation state actors, Chinese, the Russians, Venezuelans, Cubans. But at the same time, I'm seeing more in my business where people are worried about competitors, corporate intelligence. That's a very big game.
Yeah, no, it is a big thing, and all kinds of different threats exist there. I had a chance early in my career to represent a large company in a commercial espionage case.
Yes.
And it was a Japanese company versus a US company. And there was actually a very well organized spy ring that was constantly stealing information. And in fact, kind of the joke towards the end of the litigation was that they had stolen so much that they couldn't remember what they had or where it was at. It was just pervasive. If you ever got into one of their computers, you get confused. You go, is this my client's computer? Or is it the
Yeah.
competitor's computer? Because
Well,
they were stealing stuff all the time.
well, you asked
Um,
earlier, what got me into this? And one of the first articles I wrote, April was my first month of newsletters, was on the movie Sneakers. And the movie really got me interested into this corporate espionage because it came out before I joined the Navy, but it's always stuck with me. And it was one of those things where big secrets for the nation state versus, businesses going back and forth, and how do you protect, not just technically, but physically, and how do you socially engineer your way into places. And when I stepped back 2 years ago, I said, hey, I kind of bring all these things together with the technical. I've done some counterintelligence work, so I understand the human side, the human intelligence side. So I've got both sides. And as you know, I decided last year to become a private investigator because it bridged the intelligence side, the cybersecurity side, and putting the puzzle into the corporate intelligence side with the movie Sneakers is where it comes back to.
and that actually gets into a whole bunch of new issues. I think we're going to save that for another day. Um, because again, just from a funding standpoint, one of the risks that a small business has is that somebody on their team is what we call a bad actor. And this is a person who's done something in the past that has got them crossways with the law, and more importantly, maybe crossways with the regulatory agencies on raising funding. And there are requirements to seek out and gather information on your leadership team. And as you then start doing investment, particularly from accredited investors, you go through some of the same stuff because you're not allowed to receive bad money that has come from drug sales or illegal activities and any number of other things. And um, since over the last, I will say, 10 years, it's like one major new law a year, which is trying to follow and track uh, black market money, dirty money, things of that nature. And again, the business is being held accountable for that. And at levels that's hard to describe. And there's currently in place the Corporate Transparency Act, which was just came into effect the first of the year, and it requires any business with 20 or less employees to report every owner of the company, regardless of how small, how little, however, and it's a new reporting requirement.
Yeah.
So we'll come back on another day and talk about,
Well,
you know,
if I can jump in
yeah,
real
no,
quick
go
on
ahead.
that, I think that's an important one because we're talking insider threat mostly is where we're going here. And the bad actor, it really gets down to background investigations. We
Right.
talk about people doing, okay, give me all your schools and your past jobs and what you did there in your resume. And then we go, oh, well, I'll look on some database. But you really don't get to know the person and what's going behind it. And the investigation side of that, going deeper. And I'll just quickly share a story of, how do you know to trust somebody? It's something as simple. I just listened to a book recently where the investigator did this. He followed a potential C-suite executive, and he followed him, and he called the CEO and said, "Hey, call your prospective hire, ask him where he is." So he did. And the guy said, "Well, yeah, boss, or future boss, I'm just walking into a meeting right now." Well, he kind of lied. He kind of told the truth. He was on the golf course. But if he's going to tell a simple lie like that, you got to wonder where the line is for this guy on the honesty side. Just a quick aside.
No, but this gets into something we've talked about, you and I, and with Don Cohen, that we're building a community. And a community is a term that I'm still evolving. I'm studying, reading, talking to people about what is a community in today's environment. It's not just everybody within 5 miles of your house. It's anyone that you choose to associate with. And then I'm trying to raise the bar a little bit and say it's anyone that you support who supports you in return, a reciprocity, and is somebody you can anticipate that you can go to for support when you need it for a particular activity. And so we have now the opportunity to be in communities with anyone anywhere in the world. And I have clients I've never met in person. I have people that I work with now, some for a few years, still haven't met them in person. And at the same time, then I'm asking myself, well, who are they? Are they good people? Good people meaning, are they going to do what they said they were going to do? And even more important, are they going to do something I don't want them to do? And this background check is very, very important. I think we'll come back to that another day because I've still got another million questions on computer security. Uh, but Don put up another comment. Protecting a business is an added cost that is passed along. And I, as a small business owner, am working with small businesses. Um, Basically, am constantly annoyed to the point of high frustration every time a legislator thinks that they can add one more thing to the stack that I'm supposed to do uh, to um, to help them do whatever they think they're trying to accomplish. And every time they do that, they think, well, hey, I'm protecting the consumer. But if only one person in 10,000 people is a bad actor, and you make 10,000 small businesses incur a cost, all that cost passes through to the consumer. It drives up the cost of everything. And somewhere there, like we talked about earlier, there is a budgeting balance. So you go, well, that's over the top. That went too far.
Yeah.
And other times you're going, well, yeah, there's still room for them to put some more stuff out there. But simply telling people that they shouldn't do something is one thing. Telling them to, do a prevent defense with millions of dollars of equipment and personnel and everything else when you're a small business is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's probably yet another topic for another day. um, I want to get back into some of these questions, about how would we've gone through the 5-step process you
Yeah.
described. And what do you expect a small business to do on average? Just, kind of give me an average Joe type of, or Sally, just to be fair. Um, Business, what should they do to protect themselves? And what kind of budget would you think they'd be looking at?
Well, again, I've worked with mostly small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and I personally don't get into their budgets. I don't try to ask them too many details. But at the same time, I know that the easiest way for folks to make their information secure is a lot of folks are going to Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, Apple, whatever it is, and that's relatively cheap. And at the same time, they have to understand that there are limitations to just putting it in the cloud. The cloud is vulnerable as well, and you have to have a relationship with your cloud service provider, the CSP, to understand what are their requirements. So a lot of companies find it very difficult to start reaching out to talk to them and say, what are the expectations on your part? Because just putting it in the cloud is not the right answer either. I would expect that a company would say, okay, I have the cloud as a source, because a lot of us, what do we do with small businesses? We go to, GoDaddy, we set up our website, or we go to, WordPress somewhere and we put up our.
Hold that thought for a moment because I'm using Personasys or what's called Wild Apricot as a platform, and I have my issues like everybody does with their platform provider.
Yeah.
And one of my associates said, well, you should just change over to WordPress because it would get rid of this problem. And I said, yeah, but the data on WordPress is 94% of all website hacks are on WordPress platforms.
Yeah.
It's much more vulnerable to an attack for all kinds of reasons. And that's one of the things that everybody should be asking themselves at the very beginning. If your
Yeah.
website is basically the door to your office, how
Well,
big of a door is it?
that's a very, very critical point. And again, that's that risk assessment that we have to do. So I'll be the first to admit, and it's probably bad security practice, but it's very easily found out. My website is on WordPress. I use it. I've also done at the same time and said, okay, well, what am I using that website for?
Right,
All I'm using it for is a platform to put my information out there. I
right.
store nothing in my website. So there's a separation. I would like people to understand the flow of where their information is residing. So having an understanding of where the information is it in the cloud? Is it on an external hard drive at home or in the office, depending on where you work? And a lot of us work from I'm obviously in my home office right now. So we have to understand the flow of where the information is and how are we going to protect that information? Do I need to put a lock on my office door at home? Well, probably not. The risks are minimal. I have two big dogs that are protecting my house. So I've done some level of risk assessment. But even beyond that, let's go into some technical solutions. Have I set up multi-factor authentication on my email? Okay, I've got Microsoft, Outlook is my source of email. And I share intellectual property. I share confidential information with my clients via email. Okay, well, do I have multi-factor authentication? The caveat I would give with multi-factor authentication is a lot of people will say, yeah, send me the code via my phone. Okay, that's I've done it for many years, and I've changed to a new path because I was reminded that phones can be cloned. Based on my risk assessment, is it really that big a threat? Probably not. However, if I have it sent to an email, that code, I've put another level of security in my path. Password management is another big key. Using password generators is a good thing because it gives a good mix of uppercase, lowercase numbers and characters. It's not easily identifiable. As a hacker, I have a word list that's 1 billion combinations long, and that would take me. I think one day I tried it. It took me like 30 days if I were to go through all of them, with just with my computing power. Let's go back to the beginning statement. What's my threat? Is it my neighbor down the street, or is it nation state actor? It's going to take 30 days or 30 seconds, to break these passwords. Password manager, and then frequently changing your password is really. I will tell you that, as we talked about before, I'm a wireless hacker in my neighborhood, and I know a lot of my passwords of my neighbors. I never use them because that's illegal. However, I do know who changes them frequently because every so often I'll try them again. I'll try breaking the password. If it comes up the same, that person's not very security conscious. So those are two big ones: multi-factor authentication, password management. And then lastly, I'll point out real quick is data encryption. Am I securing that external hard drive I mentioned, or my hard drive on my computer? Is it encrypted? Not just password protected to get into the computer, but have I encrypted it? Because that will make it even more difficult for somebody who maybe I forget to lock my screen when I go to get my drink at Starbucks, or I'm waiting for somebody at Starbucks, or that brings up another point I'll go down in a second.
Well, no, but Dave, that's basically the practice I have is I have a external hard disk. I store everything on it that's data. It's an encrypted hard disk. I would tell you the manufacturer, but they're not a sponsor of this show, and I don't want to invite anybody to test the system.
Yeah,
But I started thinking of data all the time, like shipping a box across country. That If it's in my phone, it's in one place where there's a thread on the phone. If it's sitting in my email, that's another place because it's still accessible at that point. If I can get the data onto the external hard disk and get it off of everything else, then it may be protected to some degree at a much higher standard. But the joke I heard one person tell me once about security was, since you cannot guarantee that you won't get hacked, your first job is to make yourself a smaller target than everybody else.
Yes. And that's a balance between how much do I want to put myself out there publicly and stating what I'm doing versus what I'm trying to protect and how much I can protect it. It's a good analysis there to be done. Um, you know, I alluded to Starbucks, and I did so because, you know, we live in a very remote working world. You've never met some of your clients. We work with Wi-Fi in different places. You know, Starbucks, the library, the airport, the airplane. Well, people need to understand that, and the encryption is an important piece here, because whether it's in transit or in storage, is every time I log into an unprotected Wi-Fi at Starbucks, somebody can be watching that. Somebody could just be recording it for analysis later. And use of a VPN, virtual private network, is one of the first steps in protecting your computer in that process, so that people can't just start picking things out, because there's some level of security between you and that VPN. So companies need to be very aware. To your point about using external hard drives, I was very encouraged by my CPA that I use, because I was in his office and he said, "Hey, look, just so you're aware, I have everything that you give me hard copy. I scan it, and I save it on a encrypted hard drive. And oh, by the way, there's 2 other encrypted hard drives that I back it up to." To a little bit bigger company that you're looking at investors for, and how much they're protecting their information, backups is a very critical piece. And the issue with the CPA is, where are his backups? They're in the same place. So if there's a fire, everything's gone. It doesn't matter. So quick story, I did a risk assessment for a company down in, I think it was Naples, Florida. And I said, okay, here's your main storage unit. And they had the server room. It was a assisted living, hospital, transition, end of life care place. And I said, well, where's your backup? Well, oh yeah, well, that's in Central Florida. You know, we got a separate server room up there that everything gets transferred to. And I said, well, that's great, but what if there's a hurricane that takes out Naples and then goes straight up to Orlando? Well, I never thought of that. Well, you want to have geographic separation, and it occurred to me just this week, what about these folks in Nebraska? You know, a big tornado comes through and it decimates a server room. I wonder where the backups are. Are they stored in a mountain over in Colorado, or are they over in the Northeast, away from the threat? Because the threat, you know, we mentioned threats multiple times now. The threat doesn't have to be a person. It doesn't have to be a hacker. It could be Mother Nature. And another factor to look for with protecting information physically is, where is the server room in the building? A lot of companies want to put it in the basement. Well, what happens if it floods? Well, I'll put it on the first floor because it's easier to get the servers in and out of a loading bay. Okay, well, what about the truck who comes through? You know, over my shoulder here, 2 books called CISSP, the Certified Information System Security Professional. And it used to be they were very technical and physical security focused, and the physical security's kind of gone away. But when you have a building, you know, not the remote company or small company like ourselves, how are they protecting that building? Are there bollards outside? Because I think a truck could run into the building. And because I have my server on the first floor. Do they have cameras? Do they have security guards? Do they have fencing? Do they have lighting? all these things. And oh, by the way, as I mentioned, cameras, where is that tape being secured? That recording being secured? On site? Well, now I know where it is. I can take care of it more easily, or do I have backups for that as well? All these things are factors I would think, and I do think actually, about an investor wanting to come in and assessing a company. How protected is that information?
Yeah, I do a lot of my backup to box.com. It's an online storage capability. There's lots of competitors out there, and I also did a review of their level of security and so forth in selecting them over some other choices that I had greater questions about. But I try to do the periodic stuff, and since I'm basically a one-man band in my operations, I know that it's nowhere near perfect, and there are going to be gaps along the way. But one of the things that we mentioned earlier that I think is a big concern is we're now working remotely. And so, it used to be that you got fired, and if you had the protocol, the security guy showed up, walked you to the office, you threw everything in a box, and they walked you out the front door. But now that person is 1,000 miles away, in their house, they have full access to the computer. Um, a whole new set of protocols is going to be necessary to do a termination, and also to ensure that that site doesn't become it's outside the fence as you just described it. What kind of physical security do they have in place?
Yeah, as far as remote workers, I've worked for a couple of consulting firms where, and I think this is important for any business employee, especially, I should say, is don't do company work on your personal phone. I had one company whose policy was if you use your personal phone for email, text, anything business related, it was in our contract, that phone becomes ours. And when you're terminated, you hand that phone over. So anything personal in there is now going to them too. So you just lost some personal information. But companies should really look at, and these consulting firms were pretty good size, not Deloitte and Touche level, but pretty sizable. I always used the company computer, and that would allow them as well to terminate my access. Once I logged into my computer, they could say, look, anything not saved on, or even sometimes they remoted in and said, look, saw me log in, remoted back, and they could wipe it before I had that opportunity. So it takes it's a process that needs to be pre-planned for termination, depending on what circumstances you have. If someone logs into a cloud environment, Outlook or Google Drive or something, terminate their access at the same time as the termination is happening. There should be no heads up to them. Don't do it before. So it's got to be this dance between HR and technical to say, look, we're about to go in, and don't do it before now. Okay, so that when I walk out of HR or a Zoom call even, I know that my access has been terminated in a timely fashion.
And that then raises yet I will call it another level of security. We've talked about digital security, and we have talked about physical security. But one of the other things from an intellectual property standpoint and an employee-employer relation, or even a contractor standpoint, is you need to have the rules of engagement on paper, acknowledged and signed by both sides, that they understand what these rules are for which data is handled in which process, and so on. And this is commonly going to be covered in either an employment agreement or in a licensing agreement or some other type of contract.
And
But
yeah,
it needs to be spelled out. Early in my career, I did a number of projects where we had misappropriation of trade secrets. And what was commonly found was that the business would make some sweeping statement about trade secrets are to be protected, but there was no procedure or process or anything that described it. And the person who was supposed to be subject to this restriction had no idea what it was or what they were supposed to do. And when those arrive in front of a judge who is saying you have to exert reasonable steps to protect your trade secrets, the response was the judge would go, I have no idea how they would ever perform this portion of the contract, so therefore this thing's gone.
Yeah.
So it's also a part of awareness and training and the contractual elements that go into this so that the human port of this security is papered up and it's understood. But I did some training on trade secret protection, and it was one day a guy was upset, so he asked me to come in and talk to his entire staff. And I started off by saying, has anybody ever seen the following documents on the reception desk for the business? All the hands go up. I go, and would this be helpful to your competition? And, hands go up again. And I said, the whole purpose of a trade secret is to achieve and maintain a competitive advantage, which translates to higher prices for your products and services. And lower prices mean lower wages, which means, there's less money paid to you, or maybe fewer of you to be paid. Does everybody understand?
Yeah. Yeah. So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, it's just it's something that too often I think we talk over and we don't really do anything about it. And then when the disaster, the issue, whatever happens occurs, we're totally unprepared, or worse yet, we may have even dug our own hole.
Yeah. So your comments drove me to a thought that, as we, for non-military folks, they hear about, oh, that information is classified. That's secret information. That's top secret information. And people hear about top secret SCI, special compartmented information, all these different compartments that we have, and how do we protect that information? Well, I think companies need to do that analysis themselves. That first step. What's my intellectual property? What is the PII? These are classifications of information. But even within that, I could have intellectual property, but how do I compartment it? What program am I going to put around that information to limit access, to limit, storage or printing ability? Do I want somebody in HR to be able to print somebody's birth certificate, for example, or their social security number, documents that contain that? Well, I need to have those plans. And what I'm getting at is I like to help companies start to bin their information, because that will drive how much security I put behind those bins. Well, if it's just okay, and this could still be confidential, even, is what are my logistics orders? What am I purchasing in bulk, because that goes into my product? Well, that's technically not the product or the intellectual property, but it tells a competitor what goes into my product, and that can be an issue. So,
Right, right. And it's interesting. I've seen some businesses put in very high levels of security to protect their trade secrets or their technology that's in development, stuff that has not yet been patented, and everything is, confidential. And then turn around and put their customer list, out there for the public to see. And you get into a question: which is more valuable? Is it my customer list, or is it the actual technology that it's embedded in my products and services? So that point that you made is you've got to go through the threat assessment, and part of that is, what is the value of what it is you're trying to protect?
yeah,
Putting a fence around an empty field is not going to do you much good.
right.
Um, and at the same time, inviting everyone to come in and do look at stuff is in a totally different camp. I had a chance early in my career to be labeled a data security expert. it was kind of an indirect thing. But IBM invited me to come out with some other national data security experts and talk about the world going forward 10, 15 years so that they could better strategize how they were going to see and respond to threats coming up. And one of the threats that we identified, and this is 40 years ago, um, was that you could put information out on the internet that was inaccurate. And then somebody would pick up that information and pass it along like a bad game of gossip. And this information would just keep going and going and going. And you're responsible for the fact that that information is inaccurate. So what are you going to do? How do you stop it once it enters the flow of the river of information on the internet? And it's a problem I still see today because every now and then you'll see a study or a report and then they have to pull it back because it was inaccurate or somebody falsified some of the technical data that went into the report. So I just see that with the, moving forward. And I'm going to throw the big word on the table for you, Dave, AI.
Yeah, I've got a lot to learn on AI. But if I can go back real quick to your example there of false information propagating through the web, and this is one of the things that I've my current role in corporate intelligence is trying to parse out what's true, what's not. Because one of the roles I had, I kind of don't talk about a whole lot, is my military deception background. And that's, so what if it's out there on purpose? Is company X trying to mislead the market because they've got a new capability coming in? And doing that due diligence work, it's a separate topic for a separate time, but it's still about information and how do we ensure that the right information is what we're acting on and protecting. It's really interesting.
Yeah, a couple examples of that recently is I've seen some marketing projections that were based upon government data. And I quite frankly don't believe the government data is accurate. I think it's been politicized and I think it's being intentionally manipulated to make the government look better. And we are government, so I'm not going to get too specific. But I have found that not only passing on information that I may have created that may be inaccurate, I have to be careful not to repeat somebody else's inaccurate information because I may somehow be held accountable for that.
Yeah, and it's we've gotten in, and I don't want to take it down the political path either. We've gotten into this misinformation game, and that's played it. Everybody thinks it's Russia against the politicians in the election, but it's a corporate issue that I do see misinformation coming out for corporate advantage on a regular basis, and companies need to be aware and have an ability to process. I know it's a different rabbit hole, but an important one nonetheless.
Well, and technically anything in sales, and this goes back to my days in the DA's office working with consumer fraud, which is even further back in history, not quite to the dinosaurs, but it's a long ways back. You got into what they call puffery, which are statements that put a lot of topspin on something. And at some point, too much of that crosses a line, and then it becomes a misrepresentative statement. It creates a false impression, and it does a number of things along that line. And we've seen a lot you hear words like greenwashing and other terms that are in this gray area where someone is trying to make themselves look good by standing next to someone without actually doing anything.
Yeah.
So it gets into a whole bunch of even more questions, yet more topics to talk about. Dave, you're lining up a lot of shows here going forward.
I tell you what, one of the beauties of my experiences in the military is, we call ourselves as officers, we're jacks of all trade, masters of none. So we all have a number of bins where we've built up varying levels of expertise. And with security, it's such a broad term that we have to have knowledge, extreme knowledge sometimes in multiple avenues of security to make it all make sense. And it's been a real, it's really been fun to put again those three pieces of my background together, the investigations and the intelligence with the cyber. They kind of melded themselves, and I just came to that conclusion. What we were talking in our collaboration group 4 months ago. So it really has come together nicely.
Well, and this gets to so many topics as we get to the end of today's program that um, a small business is challenged out of the gate about everything you need to know to basically conform to the law, to be successful in the operation of your business, and protect yourself against all kinds of threats, whether they're market threats or they're security threats. And getting a, if you want to call it a team of experts, whether they are contractors or advisors or something else, I find is very, very important to me. And again, when I'm reviewing somebody's offering document, I turn to the management section and I see a Lone Ranger, single person who's in charge. And I don't see anybody on a board of directors or only a couple people. And there's no, if you want to call it, environment surrounding them of knowledge and people and so forth. I get nervous because I'm going, what do they know? Do they not know? Do they have enough experience to, get hit, with a problem and solve it immediately, or are they going to have to take, 2 weeks to go find an expert, get an opinion, try to figure out how to fix it afterward?
Yeah, I think
And
if I may, real quick, I know we're running out of time. I think you bring up a very critical piece. There's a lot of times you'll look at those people in the business, and it'll be the IT director is in charge of security or information security, and that's not the right answer. It's not the wrong answer. You have to know the person behind it. What I recommend to folks is have an IT director, have a security director, and have, if you're small enough or big enough of a small company, I should say, have a virtual CISO. Have someone who can take that broader look across. And you don't have to hire them full time. I do fractional CISO work from time to time, and I come in, I'll make an assessment, and then I'll will my way.
yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing is I think every small business should do their own assessment of their own knowledge relative to their operations and everything that can get in their way. And then they need to come up with a solution, whether it's a part-time this or it's a contractor who can come in and do something on an annual review basis or whatever it's going to be. But thinking through all these things in advance is technically an obligation they have to their investors as a fiduciary, as they call it, a person who is in the highest level of trust to look out for the monies given to them by their investors. They need to be looking at all these different things, and this is where a penny saved is a penny earned, but a stitch in time may save nine.
Yeah.
Let's use some really old statements here. um, they need to go through this kind of thinking, and all the topics that we've talked about today, Dave, I think are all pertinent to every small business in looking at the people, the physical and the digital security, and understanding the threats and on what they need to do to go through that. And that in turn, of course, raises a bunch of more questions about what is of value, what is their intellectual property, what is the threats, and we can dive into a bunch more topics going forward. So thank you to the audience today for being with us on today's show, and talking about all the different things that involve security and their relationship to funding. So, Dave, always want to give my guest the last shot unless I change my mind. So,
No,
uh,
I appreciate that, Carl. I appreciate being here and happy to help folks out with this very important subject. We covered a lot. across a broad breadth because it's not a simple answer. There is no one solution to every problem.
Now, it's just one of those things that it's part of everyday business. It needs attention, that's appropriate to the level of threat. And at the same time, even if you may not think that it's that serious of a threat, you need to go back and look at the laws and regulations that govern you and your business within your industry, because you may be held accountable if you're not meeting some minimum threshold in order to assure everybody that you're doing a good job of protecting their assets.
Yeah, I
So
appreciate
with
it, Carl.
that, thank you, Dave, and hold on to the line here, so to speak, and we'll